experience. Or if you wanted to obtain a file from somewhere, you had to type FTP and then the IP address, and then use the very, very limited number of FTP commands like get and put and so forth. The other thing that was that listservs were very, very popular and powerful, and these were topically defined discussion groups. So there would be, a listserv for pollination biology, or a listserv for APL, the programming language that was kind of popular at the time, or so on. And there was also an incredibly vibrant service that I really miss called Usenet, which again was topically oriented, but was really just such a splendid global community. But again, these were all purely text-driven sorts of things. So at the time that I started writing, when I wrote my second internet book, it was actually possible for me to collect in a single book just about every single significant service on the internet. So I was able to have a chapter on databases on the internet, and had a almost comprehensive list of each database, what it provided, and so forth. Or I also had a canonical list of every listserv group on the internet, and then I had an online little addendum of every single Usenet group on the internet. So the internet was still small enough at the time that one could, in a book, between the covers of a book, actually document everything on the internet. And when I was writing my fourth and final internet book, it was very clear to me that it was no longer going to be possible to keep up with the sheer quantity of new services that were being launched, much less all of the detailed descriptions or instructions on how to access and what was in them. So at the NSFNet sponsored company I was at, and this is also about the time that Yahoo came on board and made an online catalog of everything on the internet. And this was maintained by a pool of people who found services on the internet and then made a directory, topically oriented. So it was a hierarchical directory that was maintained by people. And it became clear to me that even trying to maintain online a complete inventory of everything available on the internet through human agents was not going to scale either. So myself and a person who has since gone on to considerable, a brilliant career at a telecom, we came up with this project called Snurfle, which was the word snurfle in English is kind of what a truffle hunting dog or does when it's in the woods. It sort of digs around and looks for truffles. It snurfles. And snurfle is also, reference to URL. Mm. And it was going to be a way of crawling the web and automatically creating an index of everything on the web. And this was 1994, I think. And we submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation, but they realized that the company I was with didn't have the software engineering expertise to pull this off. And furthermore, the management of the company said, actually, we're not a software development engineering company. This is a great idea, but I can't support it. At the same time, Jeff Bezos had just moved to Seattle, and through his local Seattle contacts, he heard about me and my internet expertise and my love of books. At that point, I had maybe 20,000 books that I'd accumulated from childhood and grad school and being in computer science. So we got introduced, and he came over to my house for dinner. And this was 1994, I believe, maybe early 1995. Yeah, early 1995. I think it was like January of 1995. And we had a great conversation, and we're sitting in one of my library rooms in my house, and he points to a random book or he says, "Have you read every one of these books?" And I said, "Oh, no, of course not. They're here for future reference as well." And he goes, "Well, if I point to a random book on the bookshelves that you had read before, and I just ask you a random page in the book, what's on the page, do you think you could do it?" And I said, "Well, I'll try." So he pulled down a volume 2 of I think it was volume 2 of the Oxford Encyclopedia of Economic History, and he opened it to page 37, and he said, "So what's on page 37?" And I said, "Oh, I think that's a map of the history of the Irish potato famine in the 19th century." And he said, "Yes, you're right." So we played that game a bit more, and then he said, "Well, I'm starting an internet bookstore. You clearly love books. You clearly know a lot about the internet. Would you like to join?" And I said, "Well, I have a previous commitment for another year, but certainly making any book available to anybody in the world is something that I'd like to be involved with." So he said, "Well, I'll call you in a year." And he actually called me 11 months to the day and said, "Are you interested now?" And the job I was with was, this is the job where they told me that I couldn't build Snurfle.
Yeah.
So I was ready to do something big. And I said, "Sure, Jeff, I'll join." And so I became a very early employee at Amazon. And as an early employee at a startup, I got to do a little bit of everything. And I joined because I wanted to make any book available anywhere in the world. And at the time, Amazon was only one tiny little example of, I think, hundreds of other internet bookstores. So, there was nothing special about it except Jeff was clearly, a genius. And at the time, I really didn't even really know what stock options were. I'd been working at nonprofits and government organizations and universities. So I just joined because of my passion for books. And of course, Amazon, famously became the everything store.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's such a fascinating story. And I want to really dig into that whole, process that took you to Amazon and how, the early days were like at Amazon. I'm sure it was like any other startup. But before that, just referring to the previous point that you made in terms of how the interaction happened with the internet, a lot of people draw parallels between the early days of the internet and how the crypto and blockchain ecosystem is today. Do you think that's a fair analogy, a fair sort of comparison to draw? Or do you think, it's not fair to kind of compare, how easy or difficult it was to use the internet and what the user experience was like, or even the size of the internet to how, the size of the blockchain ecosystem is today, or how easy or difficult it is to use or interact with this new technology?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So first of all, the challenge, one of the challenges right now with blockchain and cryptocurrency is the whole user experience. And right now, you really have to be kind of an Uber nerd to deal with private keys and wallets and Etherscan and all that. And a lot of these things are command line driven and not at all user friendly. And that's perfectly analogous to where the internet was before the introduction of Mosaic from University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. So the whole command line interface, numerically driven sort of requirements of interacting are absolutely entirely analogous, and also the use cases of the internet in the late 80s and early 90s were pretty limited.